Do you know how to Korea?
How to Korea?
How to Korea?
How to Korea?
Out of Korea.
How to Korea? This is How to Korea.
Okay, welcome to How to Korea. We are episode 20, and as always, we are dedicated to making sure that foreigners can survive in Korea. And our past few episodes have been talking about history.
Yeah.
And we're going to continue doing so because the Korean history runs pretty deep.
Yeah, we thought it was going to be like a one episode
Two
thing.
max. Yeah, like part one, part two.
There's just so many things to talk about.
And there's a few things that I've learned that we've already spoken about that like
Yeah.
I'll address in this episode. But like there's some interesting shit.
There's a lot of, exactly, like we prepared for the last episode talking about the Japanese invasion, and after that I learned more things like, I should have said this.
Yeah. I do that after every episode. It's
Yeah.
just like, oh shit, really?
Always.
Yeah. Okay, so episode 20. Yeah, we're about 6 months in. We're balls deep in this thing now.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and I think what we've come to notice is just consistency is everything, right? Like we're growing. There isn't a sudden boom, but it's steady.
Yeah.
And I think that's thank you for all our viewers, to all our followers, and all our subscribers. Thank you. And I think eventually we're gonna start looking into maybe affiliate marketing, something like that, because we need to upgrade some of our shit. So
Yeah.
I need a hard drive so I can start editing some goddamn videos, right?
Yeah.
So you might somewhere down the line, I don't know, another 6 months or a year from now, you might hear us in the middle of the podcast just being like, and no, we're from our sponsors. Like,
Yeah. So if you guys want to get sponsored, get in touch.
Let us know. Yeah, and then we'll be the ones that say, have you ever had problems with? Have you ever had erectile dysfunction and all that shit? You know. Yeah, so that's the plan. But thank you for sticking with us, and we're gonna continue working on this, continue growing it, and we're having fun.
Yeah.
We're having fun. I think the results showing are the best part, really. Like it's it's continuous motivation and just continuous growth.
And the only way that you guys can help us to make the show even better is, like we've said numerous times, turn on the notification icon so you get notified when the new episodes are out.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're trying to stick to Sundays, every Sunday 2 p.m. But maybe for the shorts, push the notification icon so you can get notified when the shorts are out. And share the videos and comment on the post, like the post, and that's how you guys can help us.
Yeah, it's really just view the shorts, like the shorts, share the shorts, and we don't expect you to listen to the full podcast, and we still have to look into Spotify. I think that's something that
that was the other thing.
Yeah, so we'll look into Spotify to make sure that our episodes are there, in which case it'll be easier for you guys so you don't have to keep your screens on if you don't have YouTube Premium. And that's in the pipeline. We'll get that done, and that'll be an interesting development.
Yeah, well, Spotify or whatever other places you can listen to your podcast from.
I think it's just Spotify. Apple Music?
Apple? I listen to mine on Apple. Okay. I don't have Spotify.
Well,
in Korea, you have to pay for Spotify.
I think you have to pay for Apple too. You have to pay for Spotify everywhere. For premium.
Really? No, but even just normal Spotify in Korea, you have to sign up for it.
You have to sign up? I don't think you have to pay.
Well, I can't have it.
Really?
I have to pay for it, yeah.
Oh, shit.
Okay. So maybe that's just Korea. I don't know. But Apple's free, so Apple
if you have
Podcast.
an iPhone.
I don't think you can have Apple on anything else, can you?
Well, that's what I mean. You can't have it on Google, so it's not.
But I mean,
free.
a lot of people have iPhones.
Yeah, like half.
Yeah.
No. Okay. I know we're gonna talk about the Korean War today, but a few things that I did pick up on. So there were about 37 kings before the Japanese invaded.
Mm-hmm.
Starting from the first king, and Sejong I think was like the 12th or like the 4th or the 12th, something like that. And each of these kings were known for like developing the country of Korea, and then it was really the second to last king who signed like that treaty.
The treaty,
with Japan, and kind of just fucked the nation over.
Yeah. And
there's this one person, I forgot the name. I searched him up, and let me see if I can find it in my history. His name is
But also that king that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Actually, today I listened to another podcast where they talk about that. I think it was that king. His wife was actually killed.
Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about that too.
Okay.
Yeah. So that I found that out this morning.
Yeah.
So what actually happened, from what I'm hearing, is that king. It wasn't the king that signed it. It was the prime minister.
Yeah.
Of that time.
Okay.
And his name is Yi Wan-yong.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys can see it on the screen, but I'll show it to you guys. Iwanyo. And I'll pop up a little image while I'm editing it. And this person is apparently he was the prime minister, and he kind of just betrayed his country and went over to Japan. So you see pictures of him wearing like the Korean clothes,
Yeah.
and then like you see him with like the Japanese
Yeah.
imperial uniform.
And that happened a lot. There were so many people that
And just shift aside.
they shifted, that switched over to
Oh.
Japan.
Yeah.
And also after the Japanese rule, and I think after the war as well. No, just after the Japanese rule, when they split the country in two, north and south, there were a lot of them that executed these Japanese.
Yeah.
what do you
They
call
found
them?
like the traitors.
Traitors.
Yeah. And
Not traitors. What do they call them? They call them the Japanese.
I thought it was traitors.
Anyway.
Okay. I actually have a PowerPoint of this. Hold on. So, the first king was Taejo. Thank you for Yenny. Thank you, Yenny, for giving me this. I have this morning class, and we it's just the English class, speaking class,
yeah.
and I was like, hey, I need some help with Korean history, and like you guys need to practice English, so why don't you give me a presentation on Korean history?
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So she prepared like this whole PowerPoint, and it lists all the kings that lived during that time.
Wow.
Yeah. So the first king was Taejo, and then Sejong was the fourth king, the one who created hunger.
Maybe you can upload a link to that thing for the viewers if they want to watch it. Is that possible?
I don't know. It had maybe like a Google Drive link.
Maybe something.
Put it on Google Drive and share the link, and then you guys could.
If
see it.
anyone's interested.
Okay, I'll give that a try. Check out the link below. Check out the description, and I'll link it to Google Drive that I share, and then you guys can see this document. And it's in English. It's not 100% grammatically correct.
That's fine.
Yeah, but you'll understand most of it. So, Gojong. Yeah, Gojong is the king that handed Korea over to Japan on a silver platter.
The
basically.
prime minister.
His prime minister.
Yeah. He's prime minister.
Yeah, Gojong's prime minister.
Okay, yeah.
And then this was very interesting because most of the kings, or all the kings in the history, there are 27 kings. And
27 or 37?
there's 27. I thought it was 37, but it's 27. Yeah.
Okay.
So 27 kings before Japan invades and takes over. And then all of them, their names. So these aren't really their names. It's more of their titles, apparently. And most of their titles / names ends with Chong or Cho. And I think that means king, I don't know. But then there's two that ends with Kun. So the 15th king is Gwanghae Kun. And then the 10th king is Yeonsan Kun. And the reason that their names end with Kun is because they were dethroned. Like they were overthrown. Yeah.
Okay.
I remember hearing about the reason, but I don't exactly remember why.
Yeah.
But that was super interesting to learn about that too. And then going back to what you said, I think it was Gojong's wife. And she basically, the Japanese considered her a threat because she was basically like the person in command, right? She was making all those.
And the Korean people loved her.
I fucking went apeshit over her, right?
And at the same time, that woman, she went to the Soviets during that time because she wanted help from the Soviets to get rid of the Japanese in Korea. So obviously, the Japanese saw that as she's a huge problem.
Yeah. So what they did was they drove swords through her. They like invaded her palace.
The
and just
Ronin.
Straight up like ninja style.
Ninja style.
Fucking, I mean, I'm smiling, but it's not because it's funny. It's just like
it's
what
wild,
you see in a
man.
movie, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like.
I'm
And
sure
there was
there's probably a movie about that.
Yeah, absolutely,
Has to
bro.
be.
I'm sure there's a movie too that
Yeah.
we just don't know about. But there was a photo that I saw this morning, and he was doing a presentation about Japanese occupation in Korea, and there was a photo, and it was done by like a French magazine. So, the drawing, the people looked French. It was a Korean portrayal. It was a portrayal of what happened in Korea to this queen.
But the people looked French.
But the people looked French, and it was just weird. It was interesting, but you just see this woman lying on the floor, and these like Japanese Ronin, like fucking swords, like samurai swords, like jumping on top of her about to stab her, and it's like it's fucking wild.
Yeah.
And it really happened, right? They invaded the palace and they killed this woman, and then they kind of secured their foothold in the country.
And I think that her husband also, he fled.
Probably.
I think he fled to Soviet Union or Russia or wherever. He fled, but then they like sort of forced him to come back because he needs to run the country or take care of the country or something.
After
like
his wife was killed?
Yeah. And I think that's probably when he decided, no, fuck this. Let me just sign it or something.
Because they invaded the
I,
palace.
I
killed
guess
his
so.
wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
I cut off the podcast by that part, but that's
Okay.
what I'm assuming.
The interesting part is so the kings, any Korean drama that you watch about Korean history, like dating back to the king's era, you'll see the king in the middle, and in their like chamber, in their room, like the meeting room, you'll see one side a group of people wearing blue hanboks,
Okay.
and the other side a group of people wearing red hanboks. So there's a significance behind that, which I found out recently was super interesting. And the significance being that like the blue hanbok people. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna come back to this.
Okay.
I just suddenly remembered the people that were dethroned. Remember the two kings that
Yeah.
ended with Gun?
Goon. Yeah.
They were overthrown by these staff members, which they called nobles.
Okay.
So you had the blue nobles
noblemen.
and the red nobles,
Yeah.
and the nobles were just like, "You're a shitty king, like get out,"
Okay.
and they were dethroned, right? So the blue nobles are the Korean nobles, basically,
Okay.
and they represent Korea, the people of Korea, and like just they're the good guys, quote unquote.
And the red are Chinese.
Red or Chinese,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it was to the point where the red nobles, they were in direct communication with China.
Yeah.
And basically, China was trying to influence the country through the use of these nobles because they still had a lot of sway over the king, right?
Yeah, and on that point as well, also another thing that I learned was that China, I guess, if they really wanted to, they could have just taken over Korea at some point in history. But what was more important for China is that Korea realized that China was above Korea.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. So it wasn't necessarily that China wanted to take over Korea and just be in charge of Korea, but the imperial emperor, whatever, from China, all he wanted was that Korea realized that China's one level ahead.
So what did they do to enforce that?
Well, I guess these noble people or
Like the
whatever.
nobles and shit.
So anytime there was a king in Korea, if he wanted to invade somewhere or do something major, he needed the approval of the Chinese emperor at that
shit.
time. Yeah.
So even then, they were under the control of another country, basically.
Technically speaking, yeah. So even back then, way back then, they had to go to the king and say, "Listen, king, emperor, whatever."
And they
we-
probably sent
we're
one of
gonna
their
do this."
nobles, the red nobles, to like be like, "Yo."
So that makes sense how everything was so interconnected. Yeah.
And it leads to a lot of treacherous activities, probably.
course, yeah.
A lot of
course.
backstabbing going back and forth.
Yeah. So again, Chinese influence.
Yeah, and it's gonna be predominantly in that history. It's present, like it's there, right? And even I was reading up on the Korean War, and China. I'll talk about this later too, but super interesting fact about that too. And yeah, just it seems like Korea only really found its identity after the Korean War. Like it became its own country, without influence from other countries. I mean, you have the American
You still have
influence
the
there.
Americans,
Yeah, but then after the Korean War, it's more independent, right? Like you have American
Yeah.
influence present in the country in terms of politics and the way of thinking.
Yeah, we'll get into that later. There's a certain date where it's like, okay, now Korea is,
Yeah.
you know, like I guess when they had their first actual democratic election.
with Seungmanri.
No, even that, like it was so opposed because there were so many uprisings and that's one of the major uprisings that said that election was fraudulent.
Right.
So even then it wasn't like really accepted until
And-
much later.
And there was I was reading about Seungmanri, and it was called KPG, I think. That's the organization, the government that they set up in China, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's called KPG.
Yeah. But I don't think he was part of that.
No, he was the first president of that.
Oh, he was?
Yeah, he was the first
Okay.
president, and apparently, like, he didn't do a really good job of it. I remember I was reading about this. I don't know where, but
Yeah.
he was the first president, and then after he became president of Korea, another guy took over. Apparently,
Yes,
I
and
think it's still there.
I don't know, but that guy that took over, I can't remember his name.
I can't remember his name.
These
either.
names are too difficult to remember, guys.
Yeah.
Forgive us. But anyway, that was his opposition, Seungman-ri's opposition,
So he
right?
took over.
And Lee Seung-man
Mm-hmm.
or Lee Seung-man, whatever that guy.
Lee
Lee Seung-man,
You
he
talk about Seungmanri?
Seungman-ri,
Yeah,
yeah.
Lee Seungman.
Lee Seung-man, Seungman-ri,
Yeah.
Lee Seung-man. That guy also, because he was a authoritarian,
Mhm.
right? And later on, we get into that where he killed so many of his oppositions.
When Seong became president and left the
Yeah.
country, he's
And that guy who took over that president in China, the what is it called?
KPG.
KPG, but the name for it is like the Korean
Oh.
government in extradition or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
Something like
It was
that.
like I don't remember exactly.
In exile.
No, I don't think they used the word exile.
I heard the
I'll
word
look it up.
exile.
I'll look it up right now.
Okay.
KPG.
All right. While you look that up, I'll give you a quick review of the last one, a recap, and then we'll start with the Korean War.
So provisional government
Provisional government in
Of the-
exile. No.
of the Republic of Korea, Korean Provisional Government KPG. That's what it was called.
I saw exile somewhere. Anyway,
No.
but they were in exile because they were not
yeah,
in Korea.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so on the last episode, we touched on, well, we went in depth on the Japanese annexation of Korea.
Sorry, one second. Before we dive into the history, I have a
Okay.
side thing that I read an article recently, and I just found this super funny. You know Buldak 볶음면?
Too spicy in Denmark.
Yeah, did you see that article, bro? They banned it because they thought it could poison people because
Yeah.
of the level of capsaicin is so high.
But is that the same? The
It's
same
the
one
same
we
exact one.
had? Ah,
So I was reading the comments, and they were like, "These fucking Dutch people at it again." Like they. So one of the comments was like, "Oh, I remember I visited, and I gave one of my Dutch friends bread.
was it Denmark though?
Denmark. Or
Yeah, yeah.
sorry, these Denmark people. And I visited, and one of my friends was from Denmark, and I gave him bread, and some like eggs or something, and I
Yeah.
put a little ground black pepper on top, and he said it was too spicy.
Yeah.
And I was like, if that's too spicy, like what? How is the food seasoned? Like I've never eaten Denmark food, so I don't know.
Me neither.
Yeah, but I just found that super interesting that like it's a countrywide ban.
Yeah.
It's like
Well,
a
that's the
law.
thing. I had. I think I mentioned it before on the podcast, but one of my friends, Basil he's from France,
No.
right? He can't handle spicy food either.
No.
Like even a little bit was like you start sweating and turn red, and
No.
maybe it's a European thing.
Because I don't think spice is big there. Like America is big because you got all those Ghost Reapers,
Yeah.
and then the Scoville scale. What's the scale called?
Scoville.
Scoville scale.
Yeah.
The Scoville scale, and like they have these challenges.
Yeah, like the hot ones.
And Korean people love spicy shit.
Yeah.
But I just found it so funny that like these Danish people. I like
Danish. The
Danish
Danes.
people.
Yeah.
The Danes. And like a countrywide ban on a product and like countrywide recall, and it's just like, but we eat that shit when we're just bored. Like,
Yeah.
holy fuck! Like it must
Korean
be really
kids eat
spicy.
that.
Yeah, they eat that for like lunchtime during break.
Well,
Yeah.
I must say, in my defense as well. Well, in my defense, I'm in the European defense, I guess, because I'm technically European.
No.
When I first came to Korea, I was struggling with spicy food.
Yeah.
Like I was really battling.
You get accustomed to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now I'm okay. I'm not great,
No.
but I'm definitely much better now than I used to be.
And even for me, like I'll sit here and like maratang is a big thing these
Yeah.
days. I'll sit there and like I'll eat the maratang, but I'll be sweating.
Yeah, my nose runs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and but like it tastes good,
Yeah.
and like I like the spice, but
Yeah.
I'll sweat.
No,
And
there's still some food that just knocks me on my ass,
Yeah.
and I can't handle it.
that
but
that spicy buldak 볶음면, I sweat like a motherfucker when I eat that. Even now,
yeah.
like I'll have just one bowl of it, and it's just like sweating bullets. It's crazy. Yeah, but I thought that was funny. Just like
Yeah.
how Koreans have come so far to be to have
Banned.
foods banned from other countries, right? So
That's
that's
interesting.
pretty funny.
But that one is quite spicy.
Yeah, and it's not the regular spicy one. It's like the 5x spicy one.
Ish.
Yeah, there's like a 3. It's like a 3x or 5x.
3, I think I
yeah,
saw
something
3x, yeah.
Yeah. And then you sent me another article on Instagram.
I don't remember what it was.
I don't remember what it was either. But I remember looking at it and laughing. I thought it was pretty funny. The yeah, Ahjummas not allowed to enter. Only cultivated and elegant women allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was hilarious. Bro.
Yeah, so recently in the Korean news, there was an article that went around saying that there was a gym owner that said Ahjummas are not allowed at the gym. So Ahjumma is like an older Korean woman,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And he's banned them from going to the gym, or
Yeah.
he or she banned them from going to the gym. Only, what did you say, elegant? What?
Only elegant and cultivated and elegant women allowed.
Yeah. So basically, only hot women allowed in the gym.
So I want to read. This is from Korean Herald, and it says, "How to distinguish ajummas from women? If one likes free things, regardless of one's age, she's an ajumma." If one gets sworn at everywhere but does not know the reason why, she's an Ahjumma. If one sits in a seat reserved for pregnant women on the public transport. If one goes to a cafe with two people and orders just one cup of coffee and asks for a cup to share.
Yes.
If one secretly throws food waste into a public bathroom or other toilet. If one is frugal with their own money but not with that of others. There's two more. If one has poor memory and judgment and says the same things over and over again. We have a word for that. We call them gonde in Korean.
Gonde.
Yeah, gonde. Gonde means somebody who's... it's a little different. I'll get into gonde after this. And if one falls and nobody helps her but the god... she's an Ahjumma. And I think... So going back to gonde is a person who's very old. Not necessarily age-wise, but mentality. In the sense that they'll say... Oh, back in my time, that's a gonde, right? And it's like Korean people are just so sick of hearing that, like, oh, I don't care how it was in your time, like it's not how it is now.
2024.
Right?
Get with the program.
And these Ahjummas, and I think it's interesting to ban these Ahjummas because it's just interesting. It's interesting. Like this gym might do really fucking well.
Yeah.
With like young people.
Of course, bro.
Yeah.
If you have two gyms in your area, one bans Ahjummas and one doesn't. It's like I'll go to the one that bans Ahjummas.
But what if like you're like a woman and you're in like your late 30s? Because technically, if you have a kid, you're kind of an Ahjumma. Right?
Okay, but they don't know that. If you're still looking fresh,
that's what it is. It's the way you look and the way you act,
in the way you dress. So, yeah,
right?
Of course.
So technically speaking, Ahjumma is anybody who is an older woman, even with or without a child. If you have a child, you become an Ahjumma right away.
Yeah.
Right. But if you don't have a child, if you become older and hit a certain age, you become an Ahjumma.
Yeah.
So it's how you present yourself and how you how you act with others, especially that list.
Yeah.
And
dude, there are a lot of old Korean women, that are in their 40s that I wouldn't consider Ahjummas.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. Like anyway, I won't talk about that. And then I'm sorry, I know we keep sidetrailing. We're gonna get into this, but there was one other thing I heard recently is I think this was on Instagram. Somebody living in Korea and hiking. So you know how we talked about moims a few episodes ago, like in the beginning we talked about moims.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of hiking moims.
Yeah.
And it was a story about these two young girls who went on a hiking moim. And then they were like, oh yeah, I like hiking and I want to do it with friends. I want to meet new people. I want to go. And they went. And it was just old Ahjummas and Ahjishis. Ajishi is the other term for Ahjumma, except it's for males, right? So the older males. And it was just like Ahjumma and Ajishi. And they went and like, okay, I guess we're here. We might as well go. But the Ahjumma started like grilling them, like just staring at him, glaring at him, right? And they were like, why are they staring at us so, like, what's wrong with that? And the Ajishis were being very, very friendly with them.
Of course.
So apparently what they found out later was that a lot of cheating happens on the mountains. So in these hiking groups,
it's like a meetup group.
It's like a cheating meetup group, bro. And it's not like they cheat on the mountain. It's not like they go into the mountains and have wild animal sex. No. But it's like after the hiking, they'll go drinking and they'll go chill and then like just kind of start hooking up with each other. Yeah. And it's fucking crazy. That's same thing happens with swimming. I found this out from my girlfriend today.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, I might take swimming classes, and she's like, oh, okay, that's cool, but you know, as a woman, it's not that fun. And I'm like, why? It's just a swimming class. You go and you learn how to swim. He's like, no, it's weird for women in swimming classes in Korea. And I'm like, what? Tell me. And she's like, yeah, so like the Ahjummas, what they do is like they'll pack lunch, and they'll like give it to the teacher because he's a young man.
Yeah.
And they'll try to get his attention and they'll try to get his praise. So if a younger girl comes and the teacher starts focusing on. And it was just like, damn, these Ahjummas in this fucking country, bro, like trying to have everything.
Because they're fucking bored. They got nothing else to do.
Exactly. And a lot of them are like, and I don't mean to shut on them, but a lot of them are just like not just housewives, but like I forgot the Korean term, but it's like where the husband is away in another city or another country earning money, and they're just here raising their kids.
And so they have nothing else to do.
No, so like they send the kids to school in the academy.
Hiking groups and swimming groups. And
just try to hit on little young boys. And not like legal, of course.
Legally,
Legally young boys. And
young men.
Yeah, and it's just like, Jesus. But yeah, no, I thought that was interesting. I'm sorry, we kind of strayed off, but let's get back into Korean history.
Okay, well, let's see how much time we have left to get into it. So in the last episode, we touched on how Japan invaded Korea, took over Korea, and all the terrible things that they did.
Mm.
And then World War II started.
Yeah.
Japan got pummeled by the USSR,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously America went and dropped 2 bombs on them. So,
No.
which it's still debatable if it was necessary or not. A lot of people are still debating that.
I don't know if the second one was necessary. I can't even say if the first one was necessary,
Yeah.
but it definitely put an end to that war.
Oh yeah, no, yeah.
Like, that's
They
a
were,
fact.
well, many historians say that like they already lost the war at that point, but this was just to
Kind of like the final nail in the
the
coffin.
final nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
Anyway,
But-
so yeah, that happened. Then obviously Japan retreated out of everywhere. Keep in mind that during this time, the United States also basically took over and they governed Japan during that time.
Okay.
So they took over Japan basically
Mm.
to make sure that Japan doesn't build up their military again,
Mm.
right? So the US was there to keep an eye on them.
There's a very famous picture of these two Japanese soldiers and a Korean man. I saw this picture this morning. If I can find the picture, I'll share it
Yeah.
during the video. But they're just kind of like, you could see it in their face, and they're just like teasing this Korean man, like looking down on him and talking down to him. And apparently, it's like a very famous picture of like how the Japanese people treated Korean.
Was it
people.
during the annexation?
Yeah, during the
Okay.
annexation. And
Yeah.
then there's another picture that I saw where there were like 50 American soldiers on one side, and then like 3 Japanese people on the other side, and that was when they were signing the leaving of Korea.
Yeah.
And like that, it was done by Americans and the Japanese,
Mm.
and they met in Korea, and like they had this room with
Yeah.
like just filled with American soldiers. And I think that was where you were kind of getting to, is like when they decided to leave Korea,
Yeah.
the American soldiers were very present.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. And like we said, with the end of the war, right? America had the nuclear capabilities. They were the only country with the nuclear capabilities.
Mm.
Russia was pushing to get that done as quick as possible.
Mm.
That was in 1945. And then they didn't want Russia because during that time, right? Even during the annexation, North Korea and South Korea were already like sort of splitting.
Mm.
Right, because you had the communists in the north, because a lot of the communists in the north, they were backed by China, and they were fighting in the guerrilla forces like Kim Il-sung, like we mentioned in the
Mhm.
previous episode.
Mhm.
Go check out the previous episode. Kim Il-sung was fighting in the guerrilla forces against the Japanese,
Mhm.
so that's from China,
Mhm.
right?
And I was
Communist
reading
China.
that even in South Korea, there were people who were fighting against the Japanese were actually communists.
A lot of them were.
Yeah, they identified as communists, which was interesting.
Yeah, and that wasn't even in the north, that was just South Korea.
South Korea too, yeah.
And
yeah.
also in Jeju, there were a lot of communists in Jeju.
Okay.
Right, there was a huge civil war in Jeju, but we'll get into that later. That's much later.
Yeah, once we start getting into like the Korean presidents, there's
Yeah.
a lot of kind of infighting within the country with
Yes.
communists, and they call them 빨갱이, which means like red,
Okay.
and that's super interesting later
Yeah.
on down the road too.
Yeah. So a lot of historians also debate that even if North Korea didn't invade, or we'll get into the causes of the war as well.
No.
But even if Stalin didn't give the go-ahead for North Korea to come down, there would have been a civil war anyway,
Mm.
because of
There's
all
tension.
all of the tension from the
Yeah.
north and the south, and not even that, but like communists in the south and whatever.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of tension anyway.
Yeah.
Right, so they split the north and the south, and the USSR basically took over the north,
Mm.
and the US took over the south.
Right.
Right, and they didn't even give the Koreans a choice in the matter.
No, but
Like-
they did say that this was only going to be for 5 years. That
Yeah,
the
it was a
initial plan.
temporary thing.
Yeah, a temporary 5-year plan.
Yeah.
Even that, the Koreans were like, they were doing riots over that. They're like,
Yeah.
why the fuck do we have to do this for 5 years?
Exactly, like how
Yeah.
do you get to decide?
Yeah, you determine the fate of our country.
Yeah,
And it's like, on one hand, it's like, well, we saved your fucking country from the Americans and the Russian standpoint.
yeah,
And on the other hand, it's just like, we finally got our freedom, and now you want us to be divided with 2 communist
yeah,
and democratic parties, like
yeah.
again for 5 years,
Yeah, well, that happened, right? And then, like we said, for a couple of years, there was already tension between the north and the south. A lot of fighting on the borders and stuff like that.
Mm.
Kim Il Sung took over the north, and then Syngman Rhee took over from the south, right?
So Seong Rhee actually got elected first, and then
Yeah.
Russia was like, okay, well, fuck, then we're going to elect a leader too.
Okay.
And that's how you got Kim Il-sung in the north.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Can you scroll down?
oh, sorry. Yeah, so that happened. it was the occupation period during 1945 to 1948.
So this was interesting. I was reading about this, and when America was negotiating the 38th parallel with Russia, they wanted to include Seoul because Seoul was still the capital of Korea,
yeah.
and they kind of like snuck that into the part, and Russia agreed. I think it wasn't was it Stalin?
Stalin, yeah.
Stalin at the time, he agreed because initially he had agreed to just help out with the war. Like, I don't remember exactly, but he had agreed to just help out with the war, so he wasn't concerned about trying to take over this land.
Yeah.
He just wanted to make sure there was a fair division or something like that. So when that's why Seoul, we have Seoul in South Korea right now.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for that decision,
Yeah.
Seoul would probably have gone to Pyongyang.
So Stalin's main thing is that he didn't want to give the whole of Korea back to the US because he didn't want the US on his border.
On his border, right?
Right. So there had to be like a little gap, and that's what North Korea was. That was just a gap between US-based South Korea and North Korea.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's why he didn't care about Seoul. He was like, yeah, you can keep it as long as
Keep it.
there's
As long
plenty of
as you
land.
keep that gap,
Yeah.
that was the main thing.
But geographically, like, North Korea is so much more strategic than South Korea, right? Like, all those mountains and all those, just like the big ass mountain, and it's just strategic.
And also during that time, the big difference between the North and the South was the South was mainly for farming, agriculture, and the North was more industrialized, and that's where you had like industries developing and stuff like that, and natural resources and shit like that. Where the South was basically focused on
farming and fishing, basically.
Farming and fishing.
Oh.
Yeah, and the North, they had coal as well.
Right.
Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind is when they split the country up into two pieces on the 38th parallel, they still shared a lot of reservoirs, power lines, stuff like that. Right, so they were still sharing infrastructure between that split. So which also complicated a lot of things, right? Then when it gets to the Korean War, America didn't want to supply South Korea with a lot of military equipment, right? Because that's another part of one of the reasons why there was a war is miscalculations from all the parties involved. So America didn't want to supply Korea with tanks and heavy military equipment because they said there's no way North Korea is going to invade. There's no way Russia's going to back them to invade. That's what America thought. And I guess
that was before the Cold War.
Yeah. Also, I guess they assumed that's the other thing. They were scared that Syngman Rhee would, because he was openly saying that he wants to unify North and South Korea, even if he has to do it with military force. He was openly saying that. So they didn't want to give him this power because they knew if they give him all the military equipment and the soldiers and whatever he needs, he's just going to go.
Yeah.
Right? Because he openly said that. And in the North, Kim Il-sung openly said that as well. Like, he wants to unify it even if he has to do it by force. So they didn't want to give South Korea the military equipment and whatever.
It's so interesting because they were all the same Koreans at one point.
Yeah.
You know? Like, there was no North and South Korea. It's just Korean people, and they were all under the same oppressor.
Exactly.
And they just chose to be under a different oppressor, but like embrace those ideas.
Yeah. Well, some of them did, and that's the thing. There were a lot of people that didn't want to be stuck in the North, but they were stuck in the North, and vice versa. A lot of people didn't want to be stuck in the South.
No.
But because that's just the way it was, right? Then, so there are three main reasons why the war happened. Well, two of them are conspiracy theories. And the one is like the more accepted theory, which, like I said, was the miscalculations from all the parties involved, right? North Korea didn't think the South would get Americans to back them, and also America and South Korea didn't think that China and the USSR would get involved during this war, which obviously did happen much later on. That's the one theory.
Apparently, China only got involved when America pushed
all the way up. Yeah, get into that later. So then what happened was, that's the one theory, right? It's just miscalculations and misunderstandings with all the parties involved. The second one is also with that first one, the US had the nuclear bombs, right? So they didn't think anyone would be dumb enough to attack and challenge and whatever, right? Because they had the nuclear bombs. So also at that time, America didn't have a lot of military forces anymore. Because after World War II, a lot of their forces just like got minimized. They didn't have the need for a huge military army or anything because they had the bombs.
Right.
So like we don't need all these soldiers.
And while you were saying that, a part of me just went through my mind and said, why the fuck didn't they just nuke North Korea? But then I realized once they nuke North Korea, they're basically attacking China and Russia. Not directly,
Not directly,
but
but
like
indirectly.
yeah, it would just kind of affect those borders.
Exactly. And during that time, during 1950, that's when USSR successfully tested their nuclear capabilities. So now it was like, oh, okay, hold on. Now the USSR has got their nuclear capabilities. They're basically ready to make bombs or whatever. So now it's getting tricky. You know what I mean? Then the second one, which also I found very interesting. I'm a sucker for conspiracy theories. I don't believe all of them, but I do enjoy some of them.
Some of them are fun.
So this one says that the conspiracy theory says that the US lured Korea into the war so that they could justify an increased defense spending budget for a military buildup during the beginning of the Cold War. And this was some document that states this.
It's called about this.
It's called the NSC 68 document.
Oh.
Right. So what happened was America purposefully didn't supply Korea with any weapons, tanks, soldiers, whatever. They had like a small number of soldiers in Korea just to make sure like peace is held with the guerrilla forces coming into Korea and stuff like that. But nothing that could stop an invasion.
Just real quick, the American forces also trained the South Korean forces to defend against the guerrilla attacks.
Yeah.
So South Korea had a pretty good defense forming due to American support.
But not as good as the North Koreans,
Sure.
because the North Koreans had like 130,000 soldiers at that time. Korea had half of that. And a lot of the North Korean soldiers they were battle ready because they've been fighting in wars in Manchuria.
Yeah, with Kim Il-sung.
Exactly. So a lot of them were battle ready. They were good to go. Where South Korea, they weren't.
No,
Right.
a bunch of farmers.
Exactly. So this conspiracy theory said that America intentionally didn't supply them to make South Korea look weak so that the North would get involved. So when the North got involved, then America can go back to their people and say, listen, this is what's happening. We're fighting against communists. We need to build up our military again. Because at that time, America was like, no way. We just went through World War II. There's no way we're going to build up a military and spend so much money on military and all that. So that's a theory that came out. I was like, oh. But there's no proof of that besides the document. But in that document, it doesn't say that was their plan.
Right.
So
and budgeting is really where most of the money, like you have to spend money, especially in the government, to get more money next year.
Yeah. So yeah, the American people was not going to stand for that. So that's why they needed North Korea to invade. And then there's another one which involves the CIA, obviously. So this is the third theory that says South Korea and the CIA attacked the North first, and North Korea's retaliation was a response to a southern provocation. They thought it would end quickly, but underestimated the North. So this is one that says that the CIA and some South Korean troops went into the North, attacked somewhere in the North, and then that is what provoked the North Koreans to come down and attack. So that's another theory.
Wow.
Which, who knows? No one knows.
I mean, espionage things, you don't really know about missions and stuff like that.
Yeah. Maybe they dressed as North Koreans and sabotage someplace.
Dude, if you ever get a chance, watch the Korean movie called Shilmido. Yeah, Shilmido. And then what it is I don't want to say too much, but what is it?
No
it's
spoilers.
about, huh?
No spoilers.
It's not it's basically a group of criminals that get sent to an island because they're criminals. It's like a jail. And they train them into soldiers with one goal in mind, which is to kill Kim Il-sung.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And I don't want to ruin the ending. I don't want to tell anything about what happens, but that's how the movie starts, and that's what the movie is about.
Sounds cool.
Yeah, and it's based on a true story. So there were a lot of espionage things going on that we probably don't even know about. Shit that probably happened. So I would be surprised if South Korea and US
Who knows, man.
first. Yeah.
But yeah, so because of in the USSR, the mainly accepted cause was that North Korea attacked first because the USSR had some documents recently declassified. And then in, I think it was some of Stalin's papers, he said that what happened was Kim Il-sung went to Stalin and asked for permission, I guess, or approval to invade the South. And he was like, listen, I'm not gonna give you my army, right? But I'll supply you with weapons and stuff. But I'm not gonna put my boots on the ground. So what you can do is go to Mao, which was the leader of China at that time. Go to Mao, and then you can ask him for approval. And if he says yes, then you can go ahead and do it.
So what I actually read was these North Korean soldiers, and I don't know if it was the Manchurian War, but there was a war that there was a Chinese war,
Civil war.
the Chinese Civil War.
Yeah.
In North Korea helped the winning party of that war.
Yes.
And
The
what
Communist
China,
Party.
and what China did in response was like they sent them back with weapons. They're like, oh yeah, you guys helped us, so here's all the weapons that you need. Take them all back with you.
Exactly.
And if you ever decide to attack South Korea, we got your back.
Yes.
That's what they said.
Yes, but one of the podcasts that I listened to is where they say that Kim Il Sung went to Stalin. Stalin said, "Okay, but you need the approval
Talk to China.
from Mao,
Yeah.
right?" So they went to Mao. Mao wasn't happy, but at the same time, Mao, he still needed help from the USSR, right? Because they were still basically fighting the civil war against. That's where the split from Taiwan and China happened, right? So they were basically still fighting a civil war, and he needed Stalin's backing and approval as well. So he was like, "Fuck, okay, if Stalin says yes, then I say yes." And then on what is the date?
June 25th, 1950.
June 25th, 1950. North Korea invaded South Korea.
Yeah. Caused extreme anti-cities American bombings.
So
Yeah.
we don't have to go into all the details because there's a lot of shit that happened in the war itself.
No, and I think what it comes down to is, I mean, South Koreans are taken by surprise, right? Like
Yeah.
they didn't expect the war. They didn't think this was gonna happen, and they get pushed all the way back to Busan,
All the way down to
all the
Busan,
way
yeah.
down to Busan, and this is super interesting for me too because this was, I don't know, 4 years ago that I learned about this, but basically if you look in the mountains of Busan, a lot of the trees are baby trees. Like they're not big, tall trees.
Yeah.
They're only like 50, 60 years old. And the reason for that is because when the Koreans got pushed back to Busan, they were hiding in the mountains, but you can't see them in the mountains. So what the North Koreans did was they started shooting bombs at the mountains to get rid of the trees.
Okay.
So it destroyed a lot of the trees.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was super interesting, right? So if you look in Busan, on the mountains, you won't really see big, humongous trees. You see a lot of trees that,
been bombed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they've just been bombed.
Yeah, so the war we can just summarize quickly because, like, if you guys want to go look at the war, go find it on YouTube. There's a million videos on that.
No.
But North Korea invaded, right? Pushed them back down to Busan. Okay, I think it was 2 or 3 days later, they took Seoul completely. Right, within 2 or 3 days, they captured Seoul, pushed them back. The Americans came in. That's why Busan was so important because America had a lot of soldiers in Japan.
In the harbor.
So they just used Busan because it was the biggest port in Asia at that time, just to launch the tanks and the planes or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Scroll down.
America came. Then stop there. America came. They pushed them all the way back
Up to like China's border.
up to China, up to it's called the Wan River.
They
Yuan?
basically just conquered all of Korea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They pushed them all the way back to the Wan River, and then that's where they thought, okay, fine, now it's done, it's over, we've won this war, because at that time China wasn't involved,
Right.
and they thought China was just gonna stand idly by and watch, and then China came down,
Yeah.
and China came down with like some, I might get it wrong, but
Like
like
1 million soldiers or something.
I think it was 300,000 or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
They came down with 300,000 soldiers, pushed them all the way back down again.
Yeah.
And it was not only, keep in mind, it was not only the Americans that came and helped, right? You had the list with the United Nations also came.
Right.
Basically, it was the US in charge of the United Nations, but the United Nations came. We even had South Africans in the war.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
That was a huge list. Like,
Yeah. I think we
I
had
don't
like
wanna look at the list
1,000
now.
South Africans or something that
Yeah,
came and helped fight in the war and whatever.
Well,
And then it got pushed all the way back up to the north, to the basically where the 38th parallel is.
yeah. So they went back to the original starting point.
They went back there, and then it stayed there for I think a whole year or maybe 2 years or something.
And
But
then-
it was a long time. It just stayed there. It was like a stalemate.
I think it was 2 years. That's what
Yeah.
I remember.
But during that time, and a lot of people are asking like, why didn't they just sign a treaty and say, okay, it's fine, the war's over, right? During that time, but at that time, now there's also speculation. The USSR and the US, they wanted, and the Chinese, they wanted that war to go as long as possible, right? One of the reasons is because all the parties involved, they got to test new military equipment during that
Jesus.
time. Yeah. So, for example, napalm
Oh.
was one of the things that the US used during the Korean War.
Mm.
Right now, it's a war crime if you use it, but during
What is
that
napalm?
time,
It's just an explosive, right?
it's explosive, but it sets everything on fire. Incinerates.
Incendiary, whatever the case. Yeah,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
incendiary.
Incendiary explosive or
I
something.
think
Yeah.
that's what it's called. Yeah.
So that's what they did. They did carpet bombing, and the US had the B-25 or B-24 bombers or whatever they were called, and they just would fly over North Korea and drop these bombs everywhere. It was so bad at one point they didn't even have targets to bomb anymore.
Jesus.
They had nothing to bomb anymore,
No.
so they just, oh well, here's a village, let's go bomb this village. And that's where there were so many war crimes committed between the north and the south, so it's not just from the north.
Right.
One of them was when the war happened. So Syngman Rhee, he captured a lot of communists during right before the war. There were a lot of communists that he captured. As soon as the war happened, he had all of them killed. I think it was like 4,000 something.
Jesus.
4,000 communists. He had, okay, all of you are communists. Boom.
Those were
them.
your brothers in arms a few years ago.
Killed all of them. And remember, a lot of them might not even have been communists.
Of course.
You know, a lot of them were just like, they spoke to a communist once.
That's the whole conspiracy with
yeah.
South Korean history during the presidencies. Not just him, like
Yeah.
all the presidencies.
Yeah.
Is basically you could get away with saying he's a communist if he opposed you.
It's like a long time ago, medieval times. Oh, she's a witch.
Basically,
she's just a
it's
bitch.
just witch hunting.
Yeah.
If he looks at you the wrong way, be like, "Oh, that motherfucker's a commie.
Yeah.
He's a Viking," and then
Boom.
boom, done.
That's
You
what
get-
happened.
And
yeah.
even if you don't get killed, you get jailed for like 40, 50 years and tortured.
Yeah.
Like, it was crazy.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that's what Syngman Rhee also did. He had all of them killed,
Mm.
which that also came alight like 50 years after the war.
Of course
that came
it did.
out.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's basically the Korean War.
That's basically the Korean War.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's a lot more details, there's a lot more battles and strategies. But you know, that's and speaking of, I know we talked about Lee Sun-shin last time. Do you remember? The Sun-shin Lee, the Navy general,
Lee Sun-shin.
Lee Sun-shin.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was the general during the 14th king's rule,
Okay.
and the king's name was Sunjo, and that's when General Lee Sun-shin fought back with Japan when Japan was trying to invade Korea.
Okay.
And he's from the island of Tongyang, which
Tongyang.
is super south, like all the way
Yeah.
south in Korea.
Yeah, that's why I was last time where they had
With
that
the
little
boats,
turtle
yeah,
boats.
yeah.
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 Sorry, just one more thing on the war, right? So another reason why there were prolonged talks of peace after the war, technically, not after the war, but when they had the stalemate, right? So we said the testing of the new weapons. The other one was President Rhee didn't want to give up South Korea or whatever. He didn't want to give up Korea. He wanted to unite them. So he was like staunch, like, no, I don't want to give up. We will fight till the death, right? So he didn't want to just give up on that. And there was no agreement on the prisoners of war as well from the north and the south. So they couldn't come to agreements like, okay, I'll release these, you release these, whatever. They couldn't come to any agreement. And I think what eventually happened, the prisoner of war, they just stayed in those respective countries and like, oh, well, you're North Korean now or you're South Korean
Basically,
now.
or you just get killed.
Yeah.
What I don't understand, which at this point you might as well just call an armistice. The armistice is called, but you might as well just call a treaty, end the war, because you're already two separate. Like, I don't see unification happening, and even if it happens for some insane reason, it won't be a unified country.
No, it's so far apart now. It's basically you can. Let's say North Korea and South Korea were unified. It's like, okay, now unify China and Korea. It's
Basically.
like so different
It's
already.
basically, yeah. And I also think if you start unifying these two countries, that's the start of a world war, honestly. I think. Because then you have all these different countries trying to influence this one big country instead of like a fair division.
Yeah.
And now it's just kind of like, well, fuck, like China comes to Korea, takes over Korea, and then takes over Japan. You know, it's very possible. It's not easy for the U.S. to start attacking Russia and China. Like, that's not going to work. But it's a lot easier for China just to start slowly pushing their borders on their maps and be like, oh, this is part of China now, right? And eventually you engulf China and Japan. It's just kind of like, well, where does that end?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, speaking of that armistice acceptance, in 1953, July 27th, re-accepted, but he never signed that armistice agreement.
So he just said yes.
He's like, okay, fine, but he never physically signed that agreement. And that's why to this day as well,
We're still at war.
we're still at war. Well, Korea's still at war with each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I saw this other documentary where in North Korea, where the some tourists can go to North Korea.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know how many it is a year, but there's like I think it's like 2 million or 200,000
Which is a lot.
tourists per year.
Yeah.
That's what Kim Jong-un has allowed.
Mm.
But there's a museum. It's like North Korea's shocking museum of the American war atrocities. Like this some crazy name or something. And this whole museum is erected just to show how cruel and sadistic the Americans were during the war, the Korean War. There's like that's crazy, and the students, like the school students in North Korea,
That's what they learn.
from a young age, they have to go there.
Yeah.
Like kindergarten, they have to go to that museum. Everyone has to go to that museum, and you have these pictures and these depictions of American soldiers, and all of them look so evil and like cutting off the breast of women and beating kids with sticks and just the most horrible shit that you can imagine.
No.
And this is what the Americans did during that time.
You know.
Speaking of, hold on, that reminds me, the general that was in charge of the war at that time, what was his name? MacArthur.
MacArthur, yeah.
I can't find his name though. But anyway, Douglas MacArthur,
Yeah.
right? There was one point where everyone was fleeing down to the south, right? The whole of South Korea was fleeing down towards Busan. And there was one point where the soldiers got a call over radio say, listen, there are guerrilla forces pretending to be civilians and peasants wearing like the white clothes and stuff, fleeing down to the south. We cannot let them come down. So what they did was they got in the planes and they shot down. Like it was like 300 people at one point.
Jesus.
300 people. They just went through, kill all of these people. Some of them ran away and got underneath tunnels. And
I mean, you kind of have to do that though. Like, I mean, from America's standpoint,
Yeah.
it's kind of just like you kill.
but there were women, children.
You sacrifice one for the many. You know,
Yeah.
like
But yeah.
strategically, military wise, that's a strategy you have to deploy. Like,
Yeah.
you have to. And then North Koreans, while we're on this topic, real quick. I know we got to wrap this up, but North Koreans, you know that every North Korean house has to have a picture of Kim Il Sung, and even if the house burns down,
You have to say that.
you have to save the picture.
Yeah.
And if the house burns down and everybody dies and you survive and the picture is not saved, you and 3 generations of your family are fucked. It's crazy.
There's another thing with the tourists when they go to North Korea.
Oh.
You're only allowed to take pictures of certain places, certain things, right? But if you take pictures of, let's say, Kim Il Sung, a statue of him or whatever, then you need to show the tour guides and they'll like approve it, or it's like,
it's a
no,
good
take
picture
it
or not.
again. If it's
Yeah.
a bad picture, you're not allowed to take it.
And
Only
there
good
was
pictures.
I remember watching this short clip of these Americans who visited, and they went to this highly developed technological institute with a bunch of computers.
Yeah.
And there's like 100 people on the computers, and 99 of them, literally 99 of the 100 people, are just like clicking randomly, like trying to
Clicking
figure it
randomly.
out. And there's the one guy who knows what he's talking about, and that's the guy they decide to interview.
Of course.
Yeah. And that's the guy, and he's sitting there like
Yeah.
talking about Bitcoin and shit. It's like, oh shit, he knows about Bitcoin. But it's just
That
like,
reminds me of a town that they have on the border,
Oh.
just beyond the DMZ, or it's in the DMZ or just beyond. But it's close enough where the South Koreans can see this town,
Oh.
right? It's a very famous town. I don't know what the name is.
wow.
But this town is like a prop town.
Oh.
There's people that work there and they sweep the streets and they do this. And
Not
they
a
do
real
that.
s- yeah, not
but
a
it's
real
not a
city.
real town.
Yeah.
To make it seem like everything's fine, everything's hunky dory.
Yeah.
But actually, there's like cardboard people in the mirrors at night. They turn the lights on and off, and
It's crazy. Man.
everything's just fake.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
The facade is real.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right.
All right, so I think that's that, and I think now the next episode we really get into like the presidents and like that's where it starts getting interesting.
Sneaky politics.
Yeah, with the movies and all that shit.
and the
so,
military coups. And all
Yeah,
that,
yeah. So that'll be super interesting.
Yeah.
I think but that's kind of the beginning of Korea. This is part 3. So part 1 talks about all the up until kings, basically all the kings up until the Joseon dynasty. Part 2 is about the Japanese, and now
Yeah.
part 3 we talk about the Korean War.
Yeah.
which we didn't really get into, but I think it's enough.
But like, yeah, we can sit there the whole day and say, okay, and then they kill these people, and then they move
Yeah.
to this town and kill those
Yeah,
people. Like,
yeah.
no,
And I'm sure the next episode we'll come back with some interesting shit
Probably,
that we've
yeah.
learned. But
Yeah.
the next one we'll talk about the politics and the presidents, and I think
Yeah.
that's where it starts getting really interesting.
where Korea starts becoming Korea.
Yeah, basically.
All right,
Cool. Thanks for joining us.
and you guys say all.
All right, so if you like this video, please click subscribe in the middle over here and check out our links below under the video.
And also make sure to click on the notification icon so that you can stay up to date with our future episodes. And be sure to leave some comments below and let us know what you would like us to discuss in future episodes.